Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. The US and Israel are escalating attacks on Iran, which has launched counterattacks on neighbouring Gulf states. All the while, the push and pull on European leaders has been in the spotlight, with Trump publicly chastising UK PM Sir Keir Starmer. That's due to his refusal to offer up a British base for the initial wave of strikes. Britain is scrambling to send a warship to Cyprus after France announced a major deployment to the Eastern Mediterranean. So, with the involvement of the EU countries, is it only a matter of time before the Pacific is called up to help? Today on The Front Page, University of Otago International Relations Professor Robert Patman is with us to dissect what could happen next. So, Robert, President Donald Trump says he is, quote, not happy with the UK. He says the UK also took far too long to allow its forces to use the base on the Chagos Islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Starmer has told MPs his decision was informed by history, saying we all remember the mistakes of Iraq. Was this a good move on his part?
I think Mr Starmer has reflected on the experience of the previous Labour government and the problems it went through in backing the US's illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003. And I think the other thing here is, there's no doubt about it, there's been a certain coolness in relations between the Trump administration and the UK recently. Mr Starmer initially took the view that being constructive or flattering the president would moderate the president's policies and make him a more cooperative partner. But I think after more than a year in office, I think Mr Starmer has reached the conclusion that he can't simply do everything that Mr Trump wants, not least for domestic political reasons, because Mr Trump is pretty unpopular in the UK across the political divide. So I shouldn't say that. He's quite popular with the reform leadership. It's led by Nigel Farage, who's a great fan of Mr Trump's. But I think Starmer has said that, as you said in your lead remarks, he has reflected on the experience of the Iraq episode and decided that Britain would have a minimal role in this joint Israeli-US attack, air attacks on Iran. So it depends how you define a mistake. It certainly has probably added further distance between Washington and London. But I think Mr Starmer will weigh that against the fact that if he got too close to Trump, particularly with this military effort against Iran, he could run into serious problems domestically. And so, not least with his own party. So I think that's why he's kept his distance. Also, you have to remember that Mr Starmer is a distinguished lawyer. And most legal opinion is that this is an illegal operation involving the US and Israel. Mr Starmer was the country's chief prosecutor, and that's why he was knighted. He was regarded as widely effective in that role. And that doesn't mean, as a lawyer, he doesn't have political views. But I think the legalities of this situation might have weighed on him more heavily than others.
So Trump went on this tirade as he was in the Oval Office meeting with the German Chancellor, and he kept comparing Starmer to Winston Churchill. Why might he be doing that?
Well, Winston Churchill was a very good wartime leader. And the irony is, I'm surprised that Mr Trump compared or made an unfavourable comparison between Starmer and Churchill, because Churchill energetically opposed appeasement policies towards Hitler, and he eventually was proven right. But Mr Churchill spent much of his 1930s railing in frustration that the government of the day, led by Neville Chamberlain, was trying to appease Hitler. So Churchill was a robust, no-nonsense sort of character. Starmer is a smoother operator. I suppose the reference that Mr. Trump made was that Starmer's no Churchill. Churchill is widely regarded in the United States as a great wartime leader, which he was, and he cemented the relationship with the United States. But it doesn't. It's a bit rich when Mr. Trump starts questioning the moral fortitude of another political leader. After all, he did not serve himself in Vietnam and missed the draft by about 5 occasions because of heel spurs or something. And Mr. Churchill was frustrated that the Americans didn't enter the war till 1941, 2 years after it began. I think what he means by another Churchill is that he wishes that Mr. Starmer was more robust on confronting Iran. It seems to me that those historical parallels are often inaccurate. And I think it could be, from British people, those comparisons probably might even be considered a bit of an intrusion, really.
Well, the comparisons really start falling apart as soon as you start scrolling on Winston Churchill's Wikipedia page, I suppose, and go past surface level reckons. But he's not the only one that Trump's kind of set eyes on. He's ordered the cutting of all trade with Spain after it refused access to its military bases as well. Now, Spain's Pedro Sanchez has come out as Europe's chief critic of the strikes. Why do you think that is?
Well, Sanchez takes international law very seriously, and he's one of the few European leaders that's actually consistent on Ukraine and the situation in Gaza and now Iran. He believes that with respect to Ukraine, he vigorously opposes the Russian invasion. And with respect to the occupied territories, which, according to the International Court of Justice, are unlawfully occupied, he believes that the West should also be vigorous in its opposition to that occupation. With regard to the air bombardment of Iran, I don't think Mr. Sanchez had any particular affection for the regime in Iran, but he takes the view that international law matters. Let's be quite clear about this. Mr. Trump doesn't take international law seriously. It's not me saying that, it's him. He said that his only constraint will be his own conscience or his own sense of morality. So he will not see international law as an impediment. But not all political leaders share that view. And particularly middle powers and small powers, because rules are there for the weak, they're not there for the strong. We can understand why China, the United States and Russia gets frustrated by rules which they see as an encumbrance on their power. But for many other countries, rules actually extend their sovereignty. They don't diminish it. And so I think Sanchez's comment is that, and I think there's a strategic dimension to this. I think the Spanish leader also believes this could be strategically counterproductive, that attacking this clerical repressive regime in Tehran, which has killed thousands of protesters in the most obscene way, you may actually be resuscitating it by playing into its narrative. After all, Iran says it's surrounded by enemies, and in particular, the great Satan, the United States. And the danger here is, as the civilian casualties mount in Iran, we know they've lost more than 700 people already. The danger is, of course, that even those Iranians critical of the regime may rally to the flag as the country comes under continued onslaught. In other words, there's a danger. I think that the Spanish leader may be alluding to that Israel and America hands a lifeline to a regime which was on the ropes before this crisis.
I'm not happy with the UK either. that island that you read about, the lease, okay, he made it for whatever reason, he made a lease of the island. Somebody came and took it away from him. And it's taken 3-4 days for us to work out where we can land there. It would have been much more convenient landing there as opposed to flying many extra hours. So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
I read a piece on the BBC this morning basically about why perhaps European leaders have struggled so much to find one voice on Iran and how difficult it is for them to find a united one at that. And I suppose that they kind of alluded to the fact that they're stopping short of questioning the legality, most of them, of the attacks, in the hopes that Iran won't become a major distraction from Trump's quest to find a solution to another war that is actually happening on their continent, and that's, of course, Ukraine. Why do you think that the EU is struggling so much to come out as a united front?
I think we've got to get this struggle in perspective, Chelsea. There's 27 countries in the EU, and I think 25 are reasonably on the same page. 2, Hungary and Slovakia are not, and they both have quite close ties with Putin's Kremlin. So I think we have to put that in perspective for one thing. And it's quite difficult to get 3 countries to agree, let alone 25. But I think most EU countries take the view, as Merz pointed out to Mr. Trump in their joint press conference, that Ukraine's territorial integrity must be preserved. That is, Russia must not be allowed to keep any territory, which was quite a sharp comment. And Mr. Trump took it well. He didn't respond in a negative fashion. But Mr. Trump has been, throughout his presidency, trying to come up with a peace formula which rewarded Mr. Putin's invasion of Ukraine, a sort of land for peace deal. That is to say, he'll be allowed to keep much of the territory he has illegally annexed from Ukraine. And Mr. Trump seems to be quite relaxed about that. Well, the Europeans are not relaxed about it. So there probably will be some tough talking behind closed doors. The question, which is interesting, which you've raised, is that many Europeans who are quite rigorous and robust on the Russian invasion seem to struggle with issues in the Middle East, where international law is also infringed. And there seems to be a lack of consistency there. One of the dangers of the current situation is that many Europeans believe they may not like Mr. Trump's style of doing things, but they think the regime in Iran is so awful that any action that could remove that regime would be good. But that assumes, first of all, it assumes there can be regime change, which is debatable given that there's no troops on the ground to change the country. Air power very rarely achieves, if ever achieves, a change of regime. And I think that's dangerous thinking, because it's not that Iran's regime should get special treatment. Far from it. It should be rigorously subject to international law. But it's a bad precedent when countries simply believe they've got the right to remove governments they don't like. Where does that end? After all, Mr. Trump's already indicated quite openly he's got designs on Canada and on Greenland. And will the muted reaction of European countries encourage him to think that he can pursue that? I mean, these are real questions. So, I think Europe, one of the reasons it struggled with this issue, amongst others, is because most people in the world regret that Iraq has such a repressive regime. And therefore, but I don't think Mr. Trump is pursuing this action against the clerical regime for reasons of human rights or to enforce humanitarian or legal standards.
In terms of what comes next, and I know that I keep harping on about Europe, but I do find it interesting, and like you said, the comparisons about their strong stance with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and now the Iran strikes done by Israel and the US. I mean, do you think that they will get, because I know that there's already been more military involvement from the European states, right? Because Greece, France and Germany are all sending forces to Cyprus after drone strikes there. Is it when it starts to impede in their territory, it starts to show up on their doorstep? Because Cyprus, if you look at a map, isn't too far from European states.
That's true. And Europe has big connections with the Middle East. I mean, many European countries, France and Britain and others, have links with the region. And historically, Britain has a big responsibility there. It hasn't always lived up to that responsibility, actually. But yeah, I mean, I think the European, I hate to generalize, but I would say the European reaction or stance is that they realize that Israel is a very close strategic partner of the United States. And they may sort of prioritize their willingness to confront Trump. That is to say, they may be much more prepared to dig in over the Ukrainian situation and argue with him and actually oppose what he's trying to do. But they may think the Middle East, unless their interests are directly affected, they may not want to be seen as opposing US-Israeli efforts there to change the regime in Iran. They may think that is of a lower importance than preventing Russia from expanding its occupation in Ukraine.
Would we support carpet bombing the country?
Well, I mean, we obviously understand. We're not saying that. What we're saying is that we understand this. I don't know how to be any clearer, guys. I mean, we've had a long set. Sorry?
Any action?
Well, we've long supported actions under our governments, under successive political parties, that actually stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons.
Now, when it comes to New Zealand and Australia potentially being involved, neither New Zealand or Australia face automatic compulsion to join US-led wars. When people think that they're obligated to join in because we're all mates, I suppose, they might be referring to the ANZ-US-ANZUS Pact, which was suspended in the 80s anyway. But do you think that we will get involved, and do we have any compulsion to be involved?
Well, it's an interesting question. The traditional allies of the United States, such as the members of the Five Eyes, they've all had a pretty muted reaction to what's happened, and they've largely blamed Iran in their public statements for these attacks. And most of them have ducked the question of whether what the United States is doing, and along with Israel, is illegal. But despite that, there is some differences between members of the Five Eyes. Interestingly, Canada and Australia have both actually publicly expressed support for US actions in terms of preventing Iran threatening the region. New Zealand has also acknowledged, not supported, acknowledged US and Israeli efforts to prevent or deter the Iranian threat in the region. A subtle change in language. So there are slight differences of emphasis amongst America's traditional allies. I don't detect any great appetite amongst Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Well, Canada's an interesting one because Mark Carney has caused some controversy in Canada by expressing support. The word support, like Australia, appears in their public statement for US-Israeli efforts, attacks on Iran. The reason I think it's interesting is because a while back, Mr. Carney made a speech at Davos at the World Economic Forum in which he said he wouldn't give in to great power bullying and he would not cave into such demands, and that middle powers and small powers are not powerless in the current global context. So we now find Mr. Carney now finds himself in a curious position because he's backing attacks by the Trump administration against a sovereign state, Iran, while his own country is periodically subject to threats of invasion from that administration which is attacking Iran. So I have a feeling that may have opened up a bit of a debate within Canada, and he may have to adjust his position. But it's an interesting situation.
Yeah, and we have, as New Zealanders, we have had a pattern of this low-risk kind of involvement without frontline combat in the past. I mean, you remember that Helen Clark refused to send any combat contributions to Iraq, despite a lot of pressure, actually, from allies. Do you expect this government to be steadfast as
I think they'll be pragmatic.
Yeah.
I think they'll be pragmatic. I think this government's deeply pragmatic. The government is not certainly the National Party section of the government. It's a coalition, of course, which means that sometimes they disagree over foreign policy. But I think the national-led part of the government has reservations about Trump's leadership, but is pragmatic, wants to be constructive and work with the administration where they can. The question, I suppose, for New Zealanders is, we often think of ourselves as a brave little country that, in Mr. Luxon's words, is prepared to stand up and speak up for its values and interests internationally. Are we doing that on this occasion, and will it have consequences? Because one of the dangers of not vigorously supporting a rules-based order based on multilateralism and international law, which we depend on heavily. New Zealand trades with more than 100 countries around the world. We need rules in place. We're not big enough to make our own rules or throw our weight around. The danger is that by being muted and not having moral and legal clarity in this situation, where a number of people are dying on a daily basis, that we contribute to the further erosion of an international rules-based order on which this country depends.
Thanks for joining us, Robert.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.